Going toward the sunset of time, I'm traveling the highway home, leaving this world of sin far behind. I'm traveling the highway home, traveling the highway home, traveling the highway home. Narrow the way, but thank God I can say I'm traveling the highway home. Well, old Satan said that I'd never be traveling the highway home. But when I resisted, he had to flee. I'm traveling the highway home. Yeah, traveling the highway home. Yeah, traveling the highway home. Well, narrow the way, but thank God I can say I'm traveling the highway home. Sometimes the road gets weary and long, traveling the highway home. But in my heart, there's always a song, traveling the highway home, traveling the highway home, traveling the highway home. Though narrow the way, thank God I can say I'm traveling the highway home. Jesus is my highway. Yes. Jesus is my highway home. Jesus is my highway home. Though narrow the way, thank God I can say Jesus is my highway home. Jesus is my highway home. Jesus is my highway home. Though narrow the way, thank God I can say Jesus is my highway home. It's set.
Hey everybody, how you doing out there? This is Freddy D. I'm going to sing If I Were a Butterfly. Here it goes. If I were a butterfly, I'd fly in the sky, 'cause Jesus knows why. And if I were a fish in the sea, I'd ask the Lord that I could see. And if I were a mockingbird, I'd thank the Lord that I was a bird. And if I were a bee in the sky, I thank the Lord that I could fly. Rocking hard every single day. Lord is the one in original way. We got Dog Bark Gospel Channel for you. He's got a harmonica that always comes through. Step into the middle and step into the front. Don't forget about our man, Pastor Paul. He takes us out to lunch. Bow tie, doing it really big. He ain't no pig. He might take a swig. Oh my gosh, what was that? I think it was a locomotive, maybe even that. Back and forth and back. I'm rapping on the mic, and that is a fact. In old Sacramento, tomato, cemento, a mama mento. And when we're on the microphone, we come so dang tough, rough, tough. I don't think you got the stuff. You You ain't got the stuff like me. You ain't got the stuff like me. I said, you don't got the stuff like me. I don't roll in a tree. I'm not a baboon. I'm not a baboon, G. I come up soft. I come up tall. I drink my coffee. I do it like the Gaddafi. And we're stepping to the middle at the center. Doing it big up in this monumental. Alright.
All right. A little bit of Freddy D this morning and a little bit of dog bark. We're going to talk some more Synod today. We've been watching the CRC Synod. Now, last week, Synod closes on Thursday afternoon, and then all of these people have to get back home, and it takes them a little while. And the preachers are usually scurrying to try and get their sermon ready. I asked Aaliyah Marsden to come on, but she's got to get her sermon ready. But I've got a whole group of people to bring in today, and these are all people that I know and love personally, and I will introduce them. I don't know how long David can be here, but I'll just go here. We've got one guy who is an elder. He was an elder delegate at this synod. He was an elder delegate, I think, last year, and he is a former member of what was then the Sacramento Christian Reformed Church. And he married a Jersey girl, and he teaches engineering at Calvin University, where my son Jared graduated with his engineering degree. And thank Ren for getting Jared over the hump. But thank you, Ren, for coming on.
Yep, you're welcome.
And I have Rick Westra. Rick is a fellow synodical deputy with me. He's from the Los Angeles area, and I've gotten to know Rick over the last number of years as I've been a synodical deputy. And so Rick was at Synod. He was right by the camera, so I got to see Rick's face quite a bit. Thank you for coming on, Rick.
It's a pleasure. Good to be with you.
All right. And we've got David Salverda, who's no stranger to the channel. Phlebas sent me a picture. He just had an estuary meeting last week. And so, David, thank you for coming on the channel.
Yeah, happy to be here.
And then this other guy, he's no stranger to the channel. I haven't had him on for a while, but I had a pretty significant conversation with him quite a while ago. He is Rod Hugan. He's an old friend of mine. We used to be both on what was then the whole missions board together, and we've been on CRC Voices together forever. He's been on CRC Voices longer than I have, and in many ways, he's sort of the anchor of a Tucson cluster of churches, and we've had other people from that cluster on the channel. So, Rod, thank you for coming.
It's good to be here.
Maybe we'll begin with a few more introductions. We can't do, say, full rando's attention to each person, but maybe a little bit of, I don't know, maybe what the CRC means to me. So let's start with you, Ren. You grew up CRC, and just when you think the Christian Reformed Church, what do you think about?
It's a great question. It's a hard question, and I think it's a tough. I'm wrestling with it, honestly, because my faith is a personal faith, and my salvation is from a personal Savior, and so the CRC is that place where I go to church. I mean, it is. Yeah, I believe in the creeds and the confessions, and so I'm a part of that body, and it reflects. It's a really interesting question, because like when I went to Calvin says, well, you might not be from a CRC home, so let's indoctrinate you, right? And there's a class that you take as a faculty member, and I learned all about myself and why I was the way that I was, and I thought it was me, but I realized I'm the church. So I say I have this personal faith, and that's really important, and that I'm not held closely to the denomination, but I will say there's some trouble in doggy land right now, and the church where I was baptized is one of the churches that there's some problems there, and quite honestly, I have a personal faith, and that hurts me.
Yeah.
And I haven't been in that building in 50 years, 45 years,
Yeah.
and it still hurts me that church is suffering the way that it is. So, great question, and I can't answer it.
All right. Well, let's run over to Rick here. Rick, born and raised CRC.
That's correct. Yeah, I'm in the CRC. I'm from Southern California. Bellflower, Artesia, that was kind of the hub where I grew up in, Valley Christian School. I think what's a little different, I went to Wheaton College.
Oh.
And then I worked a year, and then I went to Trinity, Evangelical Divinity School. So it was kind of during that time that I kind of became reconvinced of Reformed perspective, largely through Michael Horton and the White Horse Inn.
Really?
Yeah.
That's interesting.
I would listen to, on Sunday night, to the Christian radio station, and was always mystified at this program that began with secular music. And it was the White Horse Inn, and really that was kind of my eye-opening experience, or just to the realizing what I had grown up with, appreciating it more, kind of a renewed understanding of what it meant to be Reformed and why that's helpful. And so then I transferred back, into Calvin Seminary. So yeah, the Christian Reformed Church has been my life, but I've also see it kind of in relationship to the wider evangelical world, in which I had quite a bit of experience in.
Okay. And you spent some time in foreign missions?
I was about 7 years in the Philippines, on the island of Leyte, the city of Tacloban, and I served with Christian Reformed World Missions.
Yeah. And then you came back, and you've been in LA ever since?
Yeah, I did some further study at Fuller, and then I began pastoring here in 2007.
Okay. So you've both got some experience in the broad evangelical world, and so that's sort of that. Well, we'll get into that as we go. David, what does the Christian Reformed Church mean to you?
Well, it's been the place where I grew up. I've never substantially taken time out of it. I was raised CRC, went to Calvin College, I went to Calvin Seminary, and then all along the way, I've worshipped in Christian Reformed churches without much experience elsewhere. So it's important to me, but I will say that I could see myself going somewhere else one day, and so I'm not. I don't feel like super tied, but when debates are happening, I feel my emotions rise a bit, and I'm like, okay, I think it actually is in me. Like I am invested. It's hard for me to just be indifferent, and so that's a sign that actually I probably really love this place. And I've been in ministry now in the Christian Reformed Church since 2011, and it's been largely a good experience.
Okay. Now, my friend Rod has some distinctives. He's both very Christian Reformed in that two of my seminary professors, Andy Banstra and Mel Hugan, were both relatives of Rod. But Rod has the distinction of having planted a church that wasn't technically CRC. And so, Rod, you regularly write articles for the Banner. You have been the poet laureate at numerous synods. What does the CRC mean to you?
Yeah, I was, my bona fides are, I was baptized on the 8th day in Second Christian Reformed Church, Pella, Iowa. So you can't get much, and it was Second Christian Reformed Church because, the first church kind of went off. So, I was steeped in it, and we moved to Phoenix when I was 8 years old from Iowa, my dad's health issues, and joined the Phoenix Christian Reformed Church. And that little tight community of Christian Reformed people, when my dad died, I was 16, and they just surrounded us with love and care and tenderness. So I have deep affection for the people of the CRC and the beauty of that. The Phoenix CRC split over women in office, and split it, tore it in half, which was painful for my mother. I went to Grand Canyon College and met a Baptist girl and married her and tried to turn her into a Reformed person. I'm not sure I've succeeded yet. We've only been married 50 years, so there's some chance. I don't have a seminary education, so it was kind of the school of hard knocks for a seminary education, and had a midlife crisis and felt called to plant a church. Struggled to this day about how do you get it under the umbrella, right? Like I have so many people from so many different backgrounds, no Dutch people in my church at all, not one, no one who'd ever heard of the Christian Reformed Church. So it's to try to create the space where you invite people in and at the same time try to maintain some of the standards. It's just been an interesting journey. I am unique in that Classes Arizona actually allowed me this incredible privilege they loaned me to the church that I planted. So I'm on loan to the village church. Subsequently, Mission Church got planted, and I walked with the pastor who's done that a lot for years, and that is a Christian Reformed church, and now they're planting another church. So it's really fun to see God at work here in Tucson, and we recently bought a ministry house, a big ministry house where we can kind of raise up leaders, and that's my longing. I'm retired. I retired a year and a half ago, and I have Wednesday breakfast and Thursday breakfast. I got mentioned on the floor of Synod about how to mentor and disciple leaders, and just finished up a book with Andy Littleton, and it's in the hands of the editors as we speak. So we'll see where that goes.
So what's interesting about this group, and part of the reason I wanted Aaliyah on, so Aaliyah Marsden is a pastor at Christ Church Davis. She was a young person who, as a teenager, came into the Fairfield CRC, but she wasn't raised Christian at all. Her parents weren't Christian, so she came into the Fairfield CRC, and she lived there for years. She's a mother, married, 4 children, and then she became sort of an evangelical blogger. And this was back when the women bloggers were sort of getting some heat for not having any theological preparation. And we had this little leadership development network in our classes that I was doing a lot of teaching in. And so I started training her theologically. And then she decided to go to Calvin Seminary, which was sort of a big deal because she didn't have a BA in anything. So we were able to get her into Calvin Seminary, and she really sort of became a star there. But she didn't grow up CRC. But she's from a conservative church. So part of what I think people are going to see is that even with what seems to be a degree of uniformity, there's a tremendous amount of diversity of experience going on. David is from Canada. Rod is from Iowa. Rick, where did you grow up? Did you grow up in West Michigan?
No, I grew up here, Southern California.
Okay. So Rick grew up in Southern California, and Ren, I believe you grew up in West Michigan.
No, Ann Arbor for 7-8 years, and then we moved to Denver, and I did Denver for a decade before Calvin, and then out to Sacramento and other places. So been around.
Okay, were your parents CRC though, Ren?
Yeah, they were, and yeah, the church I was baptized is Ann Arbor Christian Reformed Church. Okay. So Yep.
Yeah.
I can still tell you the code to get in the back door if you want to know it.
Yeah.
Offline though. Offline.
Freddie usually just gives his phone number and email address right here online. So I don't know what you're afraid of. Let's talk about how, so in the early 20 teens, like in 2011, 2012, the CRC had been through this bruising fight with women in office. There are a number of church splits. Most of us know people who went, let's say, to the URC or away. And so then in 2000, I think it was 2004, 2005, I went to the first synod where women could be seated delegates. I went with Sue Kuiper, who's the assistant pastor, another leadership development trainer person that I've trained a lot of women into the CRC apparently. And I know that'll get some crap in my channel, but and so she and I went to that synod, but then in about the early 20 teens, I began listening to sort of different strains coming through theologically that sounded different from what I had heard before. And that's when I started talking on my blog, because I'd been blogging about, the Christian Reformed Church is going to need to have a confessional conversation, because during the Women in Church Office fight, I was in seminary during those years. And I remember very clearly when I was in seminary, the consensus was, this is not confessional. But I knew that this fight was going to be different from the Women in Church Office fight, even though it seemed like people thought it would be the same. So we'll start with you, Ren. When did you first sort of notice that this was going to be a big deal in the CRC, and what were some of your thoughts?
I think you could. So, professor at Calvin, and in my involvement in the university, you could see a separation in between a lot of what was taking place in some departments and in some. And that we live out the CRC there to some extent. And that's where, and I would say it was probably in that 2017, 20. Well, and then I was, because I'm in the echo chamber here in Grand Rapids, I knew all about the appointment of the HSR team and how those books were cooked before it started, and the arguments that were being made. So yeah, that was. And I was again, in my church, the church that I currently attend has Scott Greenway, so that puts me into a whole nother. He's part of, I don't know, you've got a term for it. I want to call it the I don't want to say patriarchy. That's got different. The monarchy of the CRC.
Yeah.
He's a part of that. So being close to him, this has been a long time.
Yeah. How about you, Rick? When did you first get inklings that, I think after Synod sort of, okay, local option for women in church office and the whole denomination, some people left. And when we had that departure, some people just sort of, okay, well, maybe we're done fighting for a while. And then you could sense rumblings. What was there a trigger point or something where you kind of said, oh, this is going to be a big deal?
I do think growing up in Southern California and being out here, it's a different world, right? I mean, I've always felt far removed from Grand Rapids, and it's just very different. And even when I was in the Philippines, even farther away, so very much removed from a lot of that. And I think. Even today, my mom actually grew up in Grand Rapids. My mom was a graduate of Calvin College. But even going back there, it was always surprising to me. And just this keen difference. And I think, even in my ministry here, I've kind of been content not to pay attention or only pay attention when necessary. And so sometimes the developments have been surprising to me. And I think most people are pretty surprised to learn that Classis Greater Los Angeles as a whole is pretty conservative.
Yeah.
There are not that many churches, very few churches that have women elders. And only maybe one or two that have a female pastor. So, and I think even talking with people at Synod this year, that's surprising to hear. So, we didn't. Yeah,
Why do you say it's not surprising, Ren?
The Grand Rapids Echo Chamber. Yeah. What gets said here is what goes on in the denomination, and we're an urban center that isn't reflective of the broader denomination.
Yeah. So
it still surprised me, being in Grand Rapids during Synod, was that, or even after Synod, seeing news reports of what happened at Synod on the evening news in Grand Rapids. It just floored me because, and it was true when I was in seminary in the 90s, but I mean, nobody knows who the Christian Reformed Church is here in Los Angeles. It's just very few people do.
Yeah. How about you, David? Now you're the Canadian scene is, I mean, the part of what's difficult for, like, Ren just said, a lot of West Michigan, I always say the gravity is so strong there that even light can't escape in terms of the Christian Reformed Church, because Grand Rapids has a difficult time seeing the rest of the denomination, which is, I think, why this sort of snuck up on a lot of people. But David, in Canada, which culturally, in terms of Christianity, you don't have this massive evangelicalism in Canada, which we do in some places in the U.S., but not in other places. When did you first start? And you're the youngest of this group, so you went through seminary the most recently. When did you see that this was gonna be a big storm?
Yeah, I don't even know exactly how to answer that. Actually, a point that I remember and be like, oh, okay, this is going to turn into a fairly big fight. Was actually just, I think it was Jamie Smith had some sort of picture on Twitter of him wearing a shirt that was semi-affirming leaning, or, you could kind of read it multiple ways, but I was like, oh, that's kind of clear. And for me, that was like, I think there's a conversation happening that I'm not aware of, and he's a very influential person. And so when I saw that, I thought, okay, like, things are rolling here. And I had no clue how 2022 was going to go. I thought it was going to be way more close than it was. I was 10 years in classis in British Columbia, and at that time I felt like that was a pretty traditional leaning classis, although very open to women in leadership. Like one year we sent 4 women delegates to Synod, and we didn't even bat an eye about that. Like, it was just, okay, this is who we're sending. But when it came time to have discussions about sexuality, the room was pretty traditional on that. But then I think even since I've left, things have changed there, and it's probably a bit more of a mixed bag. My church in Victoria, it kind of was under the radar for a long time. And so when I got there, someone would come to visit me and say, if the CRC changes its position on this, I'm gone. And then, 2 days later, somebody else would come and it's like, I really think we need to look at this again. And I think there was a bit of an undercurrent there, and it really came up out of nowhere. In 2017, it became a very big discussion in my church that was pretty painful for me. And so that's where I found, like, okay, like this is not going to be easy. Like, this is going to be very difficult for churches to work through. There's a lot of emotion. There's a lot of reaction. And I think that was just the culture of Canada generally just kind of seeping in, and, the slogans, love is love. How could you be against, 2 loving people committing to one another? And it's like, those are really powerful arguments in a way. Like, and try to stand against that, those very powerful slogans is very difficult. So I saw then that, okay, this is going to be a very big deal in Canada. And I still don't exactly know where the CRC in Canada is on this and what it will do, given the recent decisions of the last 3 synods. I think I'm in Classis Toronto now, and honestly, I have no clue what our classes will be like in a year from now. Not a clue. And there's a lot more I could say about that, but we'll get into it later.
That's one thing I think a lot of watchers who only know the CRC, let's say by watching synods or through my channel, synod is one layer of the Christian Reformed Church. Classis is another very important layer, the local council, and then also sort of the institutions, the synodical institutions, Calvin University, and this is bringing a fair amount of turmoil to all of them. Now, Rod, your church right from the start, Tucson, Arizona, is a very eclectic place. You had deep ties to the university. It's a university town. You're near the Mexican border. Like a lot of cities out west, it can be, how on earth do you describe some Western culture? And that's a bit of it. So, I mean, right from the start, your church has had to deal with a lot of different things, and you didn't necessarily deal with them in a very Christian Reformed way necessarily. I mean, you had drumming circles, you had the sinner's chair, which became a different chair. When did you first see that this was going to be a big thing in the denomination, and maybe how did that impact? Or what did you bring from your church in terms of your experience with this to this question?
So this last synod was my 11th synod. And so and they were just asking me if I was interested in going to Ancaster next year. I'm the thing is, yeah, we're a huge military town too. We make cruise missiles here, by the way, just so you know. And we have a gigantic Air Force base, and those are between that and the university, the whole Mars projects, all those things are. And then it's a retiree town, so you get a lot of very conservative old folks, and of course we're 47% Hispanic, so we have a lot of that influence with respect to how people believe. So in some ways, I was just talking to a guy. He does research as to like what's the ethos of your city, what is the city like, what are the demographics, all that good stuff. And he said this is the first city I've ever done where the number one reason that Tucson exists is we're not Phoenix. So we're not that big city. We surround ourselves with bike paths. We're very, we don't want freeways. We're very anti-growth in that sense, but we have incredible weather and a beautiful place to live. So they're going to come anyway. All that to say, my church, one of the leaders of the gay movement here in Tucson came to our church and said, I'm a scientist and I'm trying to explore if there's any truth to the idea that your environment, you're not just born this way, your environment matters. He said, I did have a domineering mother. I had a father who abandoned, a weak father who abandoned us, all that kind of stuff. He said, and I want to explore that because I grew up in the church and I want to explore it some more. So I don't believe, but I just want to sit here and engage. That kind of stuff happened all the time. And we have, people of every ilk, including, and have had from the beginning. That said, I'm part of Classis Arizona, which is probably the most conservative classes in the denomination, or certainly one of the top, with respect to, we have several Abide members that are high up in that kind of stuff. Again, the Hispanic culture stuff matters. I don't think we realize just how much the Korean influence, the Native American, we're close to Classes Red Mesa, and we have a lot of that. So all that has had a huge influence. Actually, it's difficult in my raising up leaders because they go to the website and they say, "Oh, you believe this?" You know, like I don't know. That's happened around baptism. That's happened around, you know, various things. But when I tried to bring church planters out from the Holy City, nobody came, and I couldn't find Christian Reformed people who were at all interested in one of the darkest cities maybe ever. Like, it's, you know, I've had witches tell me, go away, don't bring light to this place. I mean, it's drug trafficking, people trafficking, it's a dark city. And what greater place for the gospel to shine, of course. So that's why I'm here. And I wish others were. And but that means you're dealing with, all these things. How did I see it? I was at the Synod where they appointed the committee to write the report. And I saw the rush to make it a conservative committee so that, you know, even then you could see the conservatives taking over. Like, you could see no, we're not going to continue down this path. And I marveled at it then, and so I knew it was going to come. I knew there was going to be a fight. I didn't know how it would unfold, but and I think, Ren, you're right. It's the difference between the echo chamber of Grand Rapids and then out here in the hinterlands. I have no clue. And I think we're all that way. Like, you know, my being on the Home Missions Board helped me experience some of that. But I can remember John Rosenbaum saying, "Rod, you're like this prophet who comes storming in out of the desert a couple times a year to yell at us on the Home Missions Board, and then you go back to your honey and locusts, and we all feel bad for a little while, and then go right on doing what we were always doing." So I always got a kick out of that but I think I saw it coming, and there's more of it. My church is going to struggle. We're going to figure out, you know, communion and baptism and all those things and what that looks like, and we have already. So we're used to agreeing to disagree, and we're also used to just taking hard stands. So
I don't know if I've ever heard a synod where the word confessions was repeated more often, and this is sort of what I figured would happen when I watched this thing, because I thought, unlike Women in Office, that the denomination could sort of say, not really a confessional issue. Some thought it was, but for you growing up, were the confessions as such a big deal, or would you say, let's say, the other facets of Christian Reformed culture, maybe the Dutchness, the familial nature of it, somebody shoot, I just moved the book. Just this week came because my email channel, my YouTube channel, I get all this I get free books now, as if I need more books. But this is a self-published book by Michael Baumeister, who grew up in the Rochester CRC, and he's a little bit older than my kids. And I just started reading it, and this is a story of a CRC millennial in, again, sort of a hinterlands church, but the CRC in these hinterlands is always so weird because of the circulatory system. You know, you've got Calvin, Rochester had its own Christian school, and then often these Christian schools would get people in from Calvin. You know, my mother's community, Whitensville, Massachusetts, is very much that way. To what degree do you think the Christian Reformed Church, at least in terms of its self-consciousness, is confessional, or let's say cultural, if we look at all of these things and say, this is a culture? What do you think, Ren?
That's I think it needs to move beyond that Dutch CRC, but at the same time, that Dutch CRC is such a, like, when we came out to Sacramento prior to your arrival, we were there. I was interviewing for a job, and because of the connections, because I was part of that system and had grown up in it, and my boys are purebred Dutch and attend the CRC. You know, the Mentinks invited us to their home, and I'm putting their 8-year-old. I am unsupervised male putting an 8-year-old girl to bed. You don't. It was wrong. They shouldn't have done that. They shouldn't have trusted. But I'm from Calvin, and I must. And so the CRC's got to open up, and that was a beautiful thing about that church, is that while the Mentinks were there, while there were some other people from Calvin there, it was the broader CRC. People I had no prior connection, and yet I could get a hug from Nina every week. And you know, it's those relationships that have to flourish. We're going to have to cross bridges with our Korean members and our and the Spanish, and we're just going to have to open up and understand hospitality in a different way. I mean, the Dutch bingo is about, at what level do I trust you, because we have common, and we've got to get beyond that to a much better definition of hospitality.
Okay. Well, what do you think, Rick? Now, you spent some time at Wheaton and you went to Fuller, so I mean, you were outside the Dutch bubble, but then you said Michael Horton and Whitehorse sort of gave you a taste of the Reform. So that culture versus confession, where does that sort of lay for you, Rick?
Well, I think so. In my church growing up, I think it was a little more culture. So I married late in life. My wife is not from the CRC. She did grow up in Southern California. And she was surprised that a community like this actually existed in Southern California. I can remember I hesitated, but I warned her before we were going to the Harvest Festival at the local Christian high school where I went. And I says, you need to be aware that other people are going to know who you are. They're going to ask who you are because you're with me. And because this is a subculture, right? And you know, I consider myself blessed because I had a lot of teachers of my Christian school also went to my church. And that is a very rare thing, to grow up seeing your teachers in church, seeing them at the school. And it is a very tight kind of cluster. And it wasn't until I stepped out. I mean, I really appreciate my experience at Wheaton because I began to interact with different Christians, different backgrounds. You have all kinds of discussions. You meet Baptists, you meet dispensationalists or whatever. And so you talk, and then you begin to realize what was unique about your own experience. And I had the same thing at Trinity. I actually tell people that there was actually more debate at Trinity Deerfield than there was at Calvin. You know, at Trinity, the professors actually held debates where they debated each other over women in office. And then I was surprised in the mid-90s when I went into Calvin, and this was kind of the height of the back and forth. Calvin Seminary was very peaceful, at least in the halls of the seminary. And I think that's because there was this kind of, everybody shared this perspective. And so the uniqueness or the distinctives of different perspectives didn't necessarily come out. So, and again, I mentioned Michael Horton. I think he was really good. I appreciated him because he was not from a Reformed background. And he discovered the Reformed faith while he was a student at Biola. And at the time, he also had his eye on kind of wider American evangelicalism. And, you know, looking at the emphases that were not maybe Christ-centered or gospel-centered. And so highlighting the distinctives, you know, that's what drew me. So again, I grew up with the confessions, but it was really these other experiences that helped me kind of appreciate their value.
How about you, David? How do you think about confessions versus culture in the CRC?
I'd say my growing up in Canada. So my mom grew up outside of the Christian Reformed Church when my dad was. He would always say he was one of the first people baptized in the Christian Reformed Church in Cambridge, and so he stayed there his whole life. And my mom entered out of the United Church of Canada, and she just really liked how serious Reformed folks were, and she really valued Christian education too. So she liked that aspect of things. How often were the confessions front and center? I don't think they were super front and center, but they were like a scaffolding, I think, behind the scenes. And the church I grew up in did catechize the youth. The pastor met every year with people grade 7, grade 8, that age. And I remember taking that class with him, and most of my peers did too. And he did that every year with a new crop of students. But I think if you were to really push people on why they were at the Christian Reformed Church, it wasn't the confessions. They weren't there because of the confessions. They were there because shared immigration story, sense of family, because it's a very disorienting thing to move to a new country. And so the CRC in Canada is mostly immigrants after World War II. And so people found each other and had that trust of, well, we speak the same language, we've gone through the same experience. And so you're really binding together, around that experience. And I think that, so if you were to just, change the confession, say like, oh, let's just throw out one of these old confessions, I think, 90% of the church would have been like, oh, okay, like as long as we can still be together. So I think right now, the big crisis in the CRC is that residual cultural glue is coming undone. But there's still enough, like, we don't want to break the family, like we really don't want to break this apart, because it just feels like something really precious is kind of dying. Mm-hmm. So I don't know. So and in a way, that's how I deal with confessions too. They're a bit of a scaffolding. They keep me rooted in something bigger than myself. But do I highlight them every week? No. Maybe every couple months it'll leak into my preaching. But I still do enjoy teaching the catechism to high school students, and I'll use it frequently. So I don't know what else to say about that, but that's where I'm at.
So Rod, you and I are the old guys, and I would. Did you have midweek catechism classes in Iowa?
I was.
Oh, you did, Ren,
in Denver. Yeah.
Wow.
I was 8 years old when we moved to Phoenix, but we had Wednesday night was first catechism and then cadets. And so you did your catechism, and Sunday afternoons were spent memorizing the answers. My mom and dad made sure we could do that and recite the answer correctly. And then later, when I became an elder, my job was to teach catechism classes. By that time, they had moved it to Sunday morning after church, but it was still a huge, and it's so formed and shaped me, right? Like learning all that stuff. At the time, I was like every kid, bored and silly, but there was something powerful. Some of those reciting the 10 Commandments every Sunday, reciting the Apostles' Creed, all those things are all things we do in the village now. We have the Lord's Prayer, we have the Apostles' Creed, and have the young kids lead us in those things. but I find now it's all to train the adults, not the kids, so much, because they clearly don't know. Like you're not. And when you're I don't know, as a church planter, I'm a very practical man. Like you don't start with, infralapsarianism and superlapsarianism in a conversation with well, you can, but we're just trying to get them to understand who Jesus is at the very basic level. And I think we don't. When I hear these people, our church does all these things around the confessions, and I think, well, then you must not be reaching a lot of people who are new to the faith, completely new to the faith, who've never heard of the faith. I've had the privilege, I just retired a year and a half ago. I had the privilege of baptizing, I don't know, literally hundreds of people in my life because of this mission we call the Village, and walking people into faith. And I think, I now work with some church planters who, it's important to them. It's hugely important to them, but it's not, it's I don't know. You're a practitioner. When you're a practitioner, you just do it. You don't have time. Well, if you do have time, then you have too much time on your hand because you're not probably doing the real work that's called. That's the Rod Hugan theory, of which there are many and not very many good ones. But I think also it's because it shaped me. I want that for our kids, right? And so, I had some kids that I went through A Place to Stand with, and they loved it, and we had great conversations. So I think those kinds of things are how do you take what you love and then reshape it and reform it into the culture in which you live? That's the art of planting a church. So you said, well, we have drumming circles. Okay, they're congregational meetings. We just call them drumming circles, but then we actually play drums and we actually sing and we actually shout but it's not like any congregational meeting that you ever attended in your life. We never talk about a budget. We never approve anything. We get together, and that goes back to the intimacy of the relationships, right? At Synod, there are so many people there that I love and I've spent my life with, I've talked to in every place. Did you know that Rick Westron, I just want to go on record as saying my brother was his math teacher. Can you imagine that? I talked to my brother and he said, I think I got sideways with his parents because I was trying to talk him out of engineering. And he says, and they were not happy with me. But I said, well, did you give him a bad grade in math? Because I don't know if you see this. When we were at Synod, he ran me into a wall and ripped the flesh off my arm and peeled back the skin, and I was bleeding like mad, and I had to go. The police had to come. One of your old security people came, and they had to bandage it all up and take a police report. So that's how bad it was. And so I just want you to know that Synod is a dangerous place, and B, those connections are so valuable and wonderful and beautiful, and I love that relationship. And that's what it boils down to.
Now, Rick, I'm a pretty big guy. Rod's bigger than I am, and you're smaller than I am. It took a lot of chutzpah to attack Rod that way.
Yeah, I think the truth is that Rod wasn't necessarily paying attention to where he was walking.
Rod doesn't really see that well, too. We know that. Now, how many, just hold your fingers up. Well, Rod, you've been to 11 synods, so you don't have enough fingers. But the rest of you, how many synods have you been to? 2 for Ren, 2 for David, and 5 for Rick. And,
so how many for you, Paul?
I think I've been to 6.
Ooh.
So getting up there.
Yeah.
5 or 6. Now, Ren, your 2 synods were in succession. And because you're not a minister, ministers tend to go more often because elders kind of come in and out of service. And of course, the last synod you went to was last year. And so you haven't been to synods you haven't had a non-post COVID synod. And then we'll get into that for some of us because it's 2022 I went to 2022 and it was familiar, but of course it was intense because it was after COVID, after a few years. I kind of knew which way things were going to go. I suspected, but then it was even more dramatic than I thought. Coming into this synod, Ren, what were some of your thoughts? And were there ways that this synod 2024 was different from 2023?
The feeling was very different.
Oh, okay. How so?
I felt last year I would say okay and so now all of those things you've said about me I won't, and that's the lens that you have to come through. Is I had no idea what was going on last year. I had gone through I prepped a ton because I'm a faculty member. I thought this was a good opportunity to serve the church, and I had a lot of time to prepare, and I used that time. So school ended about May 1st, and I studied. I mean, I read church order several times and the supplements. Not only did I read the whole agenda several times. I was very well prepared, but had no idea what I was doing. There were like questions and not sure where direction would go and not sure what would happen. And this year came in, there was a resoluteness of purpose that I felt that, and I would say again, on the heels of last year, there was stuff left undone, and there would not be those sacrifices this year. And there was a focus it was laser-like focus on getting the things done. At the same time, really giving people time to breathe. That was interesting too. How Derek just did a wonderful, and everybody said that. So I'm just beating that gong again. A wonderful job of that resolve and freedom and breathing. Yeah.
Okay, Rick, so did you go to any of the post-COVID synods, or was this your first post-COVID synod?
This was my first post-COVID. Okay.
And so what did you notice going into this synod?
Well, at least from the agenda, it was a barrage. Just a barrage of overtures and communications from each side. Comparing it to my previous 4, I mean, those were relatively simple by comparison. I mean, this was definitely, more intense just in terms of the significance. And I think that was reflected in the agenda, just the amount, the carryover from the previous agenda and communications and overtures from each side. So, and, I think to improve upon last year's, they began online. They had 2 online kind of introductory sessions to kind of, help with that focus. So, yeah, it's overwhelming. It always is. I tell people who from here when they go for the first time is, read your committee stuff first. Know that, and it is going to be a whirlwind. And I think the same holds true this time too. It's a lot of work. It's intense. And I know that in our committee, one of the issues we had was that, all of the issues interrelate. And so the program committee, I think, had to do a really hard job of divvying up, materials. And then when we were in committee, sometimes we would start to begin talking about this other thing, but then we were told, well, you know what, we don't really need to do that because that's going to be handled by, this other committee and this other committee. And all these things kind of fit together like dominoes, and it was kind of difficult that way. We're all talking about the same thing, but different aspects of it. So that was very unusual.
Yeah, I don't know if I've seen a synod where usually the different advisory committees are sort of siloed. And in the 2022 synod, I was on the binationality team, and that was our focus. And we knew that there were these other things, but we were going to handle binationality. This one, I don't think I've ever seen one issue so distributed across advisory teams, which would mean that it gets really difficult working in your advisory team depending on what other teams are doing, and then the sequence at which they're going to come to the floor, because a decision being made at one point is going to impact your report. So this was, in that sense, probably the most complex synod just procedurally that I've seen.
Well, and that's exactly what happened to our committee. So we were kind of the last domino, and basically we had to rewrite, our report because of prior decisions that had been made. We were going to propose certain actions. Well, it would end up being proposing a completely different set of actions what we had already approved earlier. So we had to go back and rework basically the night before. I mean, it was pretty stressful for our committee because we were at the end of the chain, so to speak.
Okay. So David, this was your second synod. What was your first?
I think it was 2012 or 13.
Okay. Quite a separation between them.
Yeah. 11 or 12 years, or maybe 13. I don't even know.
Okay. So what did you notice about this synod coming into it?
Well, in 2000, I think it was 13. Like, I didn't know what was going on ever. I could never find the right place to be. So I felt confused the entire time. But it was low stakes. It was a low stakes synod. And so I remember I was going out every night with friends. I was back in Grand Rapids. I'm just having fun. And then I show up on the synod floor and I'm like, I got paper everywhere and I don't know which one to pay attention to. But it felt like it almost didn't matter, like, because there was a lot of unity. There wasn't really anything difficult to deal with. This synod, I looked like I was put on the Gravamen committee.
And then I looked at that word, huh?
Yeah, Gravamen. Yeah.
There was a whole lesson on that.
Yeah. Didn't you pay attention, David?
I know. But I looked at the agenda. I thought, oh my goodness, like there's no going out this synod. Like I've got to buckle it down. And so I read a lot coming into things, and I thought a lot about it. And then our committee experience was quite amazing. It's actually a miracle, I think, that we didn't have majority, minority, but we had just one report. And I was sort of the lone. So I wrote 2 minority reports because at a certain point, like this was just so intense and not in any way mean. Like there was such a good, calm spirit in the room, and I think Andy Seitzma really helped to create that. But at a certain point, like I was going along with the group. At a certain point, something was said, and it just like hit me. It was like, is this what I want? And so I just started writing. And on Sunday morning, I was trying to edit this our preamble to the report, and I can't do this. I am just not on board with this. And so I'm like, well, what are you on board with, David? You gotta start putting this down. And so I didn't go to church. Like I was like, my fingers just started flying on my keyboard. I'm like, okay, this is your act of worship this morning is to get this out. And so I started and I wrote this minority report. I've never done one of those before, so it's like I'm just making things up, trying to get my opinion out. And I just send this out to all the people in my committee. I'm like, I'm sorry guys, but this is where I'm at. And then I met with the chair, and then they're like, yeah, maybe they never discouraged it. No one ever discouraged. I really came to appreciate how Synod allows for everyone's voice in sort of you don't get to say whatever you want to say, and you don't get mic time all the time, but you always actually get to have your voice. And so I met with the chair and the reporter, and they gave me some suggestions for how to basically make a better minority report. So I went back in the afternoon and wrote my second minority report with some of their suggestions in mind, and just totally redid it. And then procedurally, they're like, this has to get before the body, like before the committee. You can't just submit your minority report without everyone else seeing it. So we had this basically an emergency meeting on Sunday night at 10 o'clock. We were up till 11:30, and the committee heard me out, and they're like, yeah, no, we like some of your ideas. Let's incorporate them in. And then I was all of a sudden like, you know what? I think I can sign this. And I still felt mixed about it.
Can
but
I ask?
Yeah.
And I don't know if I can do this without weeping, but you went representing what you were called to, a position you were called to by God. I trust you weren't representing your own ideas. And then you negotiated with the group to get, like, if your idea is represented, and you can't do it in it's not one dimensional. It's the ideas, the positions are very complex. But if you represent a position, then you negotiate with the group to get to this consensus, which is not where you started. And I wrestle with, did I sell out my God in the process? Did I sell it out for political? Did I sell out because I was weak and simple? But I had a position that I thought represented my God. And we landed somewhere else. And was that an act of faith or faithlessness? And it torments me.
Yeah, I hear you. Yeah, no, I felt, I know exactly what you're talking about, Ren. And even after when I gave my yes to it, almost the next feeling I had was, did I just capitulate for the sake of the group, which is kind of what I do.
Did I sacrifice my God for the
you
group?
know what? Everyone wants to do this. I guess I'll just go with the flow. That is part of my nature to just sort of want to make peace in the situation. And I don't know. I cried way more than I ever thought I would. It was way more emotional on me. And I don't know. It was quite a remarkable experience. I'm really still processing. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
It's something that people who watch Synod on the internet can't appreciate. And actually, I debriefed with Aaliyah a couple days ago by phone, and that was one of the things. It was her first Synod. She's not been a minister very long, but she said I had no idea how much of Synod is in those advisory committees. And I would argue, in many ways, that's the real Synod. That's in those advisory committees. And as you say, David, that's sort of where everyone has a voice. And before Aaliyah went, she says, well, what do you have to say to me? I said, well, the first thing is your advisory committee is really where you speak. So much of what happens on the floor can tend to be, it's just what happens on the floor of the plenary session. But in the advisory committee is really where you as a delegate wrestle with, in a limited thing, wrestle with the others and wrestle with your conscience and work together towards agreement and in many ways mutual submission, because to what degree mutual submission, to what degree negotiation, but that's really the genius of Synod, is the plenary committees, and they're not on YouTube live stream. So
and my committee is, I'll just say this briefly, because we stuck together, it was a more well-rounded report. And people moved, it wasn't just me kind of making these hard choices of other people were making hard choices to let go of things that they felt really important about. or they felt they were very important. And so I saw it both ways, and it was actually very powerful to be a part of.
Good, Ren.
You say you're still wrestling, David, with what took place last week. What was your experience in 2013 when you say you were dealing with? My experience last year, because I served on education committee, this year we had some weighty issues, I'll say. Just use those words. And my experience was different last year because the weightiness of the issues and sacrificing candidacy is not, it's important, but it's not what we were. Did you walk away from Synod in 2013 and go, yep, piece of cake, I could go back next year? Or was that, like this year, you and I are probably similar. We're like, wow, we're not going to sleep for another week. The demons come out as soon as you lay down, and it's hard. What was 2013? Just easy peasy, and it was a vacation that you didn't bring your wife on.
That's right. Yeah. It was fine, but I did go away thinking I don't need to do this all the time. It's like I could go once a decade, and that would probably be good. But after honestly, made me think, oh, I could go more often, but I wouldn't want to go every year. Like it took more of a emotional toll than I expected.
So Rod, you've almost been to more synods than the rest of us combined. Not quite. What did you notice coming into this one?
I think the political stuff, like the very first synod I went to was in the 80s, 89, I think. And it was a 2-week synod, and I was an elder delegate, and man, did you have time for relationship building and conversations, and it was truly deliberative. It's no longer deliberative. The little bit of deliberation that happens in the committee. There's no deliberation on the floor that you're just arguing and making your point. I think all the various outside influences were going, you can name them all. They're all, when we shortened it to 1 week, we created this thing where you have a limited time to get your voice in, you better get your voice in, so you resort to politics to do that. And so you try to influence ahead of time and all that kind of stuff. So I really felt that. Man, Ren and David, I so agree with you. I was on the discipline committee, committee 8, and that was brutal. Like, I want to show you, if I can, does it come through?
Yeah, yeah, right there. I see it. Yeah, your cross.
That's a cross I've worn around my neck for 25 years. It's a beautiful cross. I love it, and my wife gave it to me. I have a theology of jewelry you can talk to me about sometime, but this cross was really meaningful to me. While we were sitting in our committee and the arguments were raging back and forth, literally the cross just broke and part of it fell on the ground. And I just wept. Not for the loss of the cross, but for the loss of what I see. I predicted 20 years ago the denomination was going to die. Dying is ugly, and it's a slow process, and it's painful to watch. And we're ripping each other apart, and we're trying to see who's pure and not pure and more pure, and who's got it together and who doesn't have it together, and who's more loving and who's kinder, and all those things. And we're fighting over less and less and less. And so the fights become more and more bitter and more angry and more virulent. And so you have to, so I'm sitting in the committee, and I, like you, David, I would have had to write we had a minority and a majority. I would have had to write another minority, and I actually started thinking about that because there were certain things I'm totally in agreement with, and then there's some other things in our committee I just think no, that's just wrong, and so I compromised, and like you all did. May I say, I think God delights in that, actually. I've had to do that in ministry for all these years. So my co-pastor, Eric Siepin, he is now a commissioned pastor in the CRC. When we first met, he did not believe in the baptism of the children of believing parents. Infant baptism was not a thing. But I love that man. And so we were in relationship together in ministry. And it's like, I can't just divide this, right? So we compromised, and we did infant baptisms, and we did he would do the baby dedications, and I do. Then he asked me to do a dedication of his daughter. And I said, this goes against everything I hold dear. Like this, you're asking me to do the impossible. But I did it because I love him, and I love the intimacy of the relationship. It tore me up to do it. And he recognized it and wept, thanked me profusely, and said, when your grandbabies come, because I'm too old to have babies, when your grandbabies come along, he says, I would love to be the one who baptized them as infants. And I think that, and then later on, he started to see the wisdom and beauty of covenant baptism and made an incredible defense of it when he became ordained as a commissioned pastor. So, but that took time. It took a dozen years or more, it doesn't happen by Thursday. And I think once we set up these boundaries, it all has to happen by Thursday. The other thing we disagreed on was women in church office. And I was a huge proponent, and he was absolutely opposed. Although he says he never was. It's not true. But you can't both have women in office and not have women in office. So we could compromise in this other area, but we couldn't. So I learned this really hard word, which is submission. So I said to Eric, okay, we won't have women as elders and deacons or pastors, but I want you to know you're dead wrong. And I completely disagree with you, but I will not divide the church over this. I just won't. I'm for it publicly, and not because I'm for it, but because for the sake of oneness and unity. So now, by the way, his wife is one of our pastors and who took my place, just so you know. But all again, that takes incredible amount of time. And I think with the compromising it's huge. It's the essence of what we are called to do. And that means a guy who can trace his baptismal records through the generations back to when Napoleon invaded the Netherlands and forced those dumb Dutch people to take last names. Christian names. I'm in that long line. And so, and it's not submission if you don't give up something you dearly, truly, deeply believe, right? Then it's just negotiation or all these other things. But to take something that's so precious to you and allow it to not stand, that's the hardest thing. People asked me when I retired a year and a half ago at the banquet they threw me, they said, what do you wish you had preached about more? And I said submission, because it's the hardest thing Christians do.
Now you mentioned time, Rod. This synod has been criticized for laying out timelines. Now, as I mentioned before, synod is but one layer of a multi-layered church. What do you guys think happens in the classis around you now after this synod? My classis, now it's interesting because somebody on CRC Voices said the three biggest classes in the denomination are Grand Rapids East, Central California, and Greater Los Angeles, which is interesting because two of the three of them are here and we're out here on the West Coast. And my classis really hasn't discussed any of these issues hardly at all as a classis. every now and then something will come up on an interview, let's say a classical exam on a candidate, where do you stand with respect to the HSR? But beyond that, our classis has not debated, deliberated, anything like this. And the question after this, I want to get to I think the vast majority of churches that have not discussed this, and this isn't a hot topic locally, but this synod said, okay, you've basically got it. This synod was, as Ren said, resolute. And I wasn't surprised by the outcomes of this synod. Again, I think via Paul de Vries' speech at the last synod and kind of the debacle that it all fell apart with, this synod was, we're going to lay down guidelines, timelines, and mandates. But now these are synodical mandates, and synod wouldn't be sort of, it's sometimes a sign of weakness. If you're in a store and you watch a parent with a child who's sort of having a fit, you sort of understand the weakness of the parent by how exaggerated the punishment threats become. Me growing up with a stern Frisian mom, it just took a look. And, and I think a lot of us can sort of, yep, there's that look. And it's like, whoop, I'm back on track. But when you watch a parent that's just sort of, there's every imaginable threat coming down the pipe out of that person's mouth, to me, it says either this person never follows through with their threats or is unable to follow through with their threats. And so in some ways, a synod making really hard and fast rules says something about the weakness of, let's say, the shared culture, the internalized discipline, all of these things that create a community. So and we're all from different classes, and our classes are in different places. But what do you think happens next, Bren?
I think, well, again, I'll say I think that part of my classis will say that has to be upheld, or our whole classis could leave too. I mean, we're holding to these ideas and we're trying to covenant together. And if we find that synod can't uphold the covenants and can't enforce, then then that's the other way the church goes away. Is that these are ideas that it's a divisional issue, and so we have to allow it at some way to divide us. Yeah, synod put out some, this is the way that we think it will divide us, but that's not the only way that it could happen. So, I guess people would say that we're putting out a marker of the true church. Okay, who's on board? And so, I don't know. Those are bold statements, but and I watched Eastern Avenue's Sunday service. I watched Neelan's Avenue Sunday service this week, and I think they are of the idea. Yeah, this marker, this line has been put down, and we've been told, we've been kicked out. Is language they're using. They've been, the discipline is a discipling. You heard that a lot. We don't want submission is what, is a good word. And I hate to say that, but they're not, if there's not submission, then there has to be that separation, I guess. Yeah. It was hard watching those services. I don't know if any of you did that as well this week, but it was really challenging because it's family. It's the Mentics on Sunday. It's hard. It's family.
Yeah. What do you think, Rick? What happens next?
Well, I think you're right in that, it goes to the classis, and again, there can be a weak link there. It's like who in the classis is actually aware of the decisions that have been made. A lot depends on who went to classis or who went to synod from the classis, how clearly the results of those decisions are communicated to classis. I know, like, one of the things that came out was, okay, now we're gonna sign the covenant of office bearers, yearly at classis. To kind of elevate that issue. But like your classes, Greater Los Angeles, we really haven't discussed these things at length. We really haven't needed to per se, but then, again, for me, looking in, you have a classes like Grand Rapids East, where that's actually where the breakdown was, or, there's almost a majority of the classes that's leaning one way. So do you really get follow through on some of these things? Is it wholehearted? To me, that I have questions. It is an open question. And being on our committee, I was on Aaliyah's committee too, and it was an unusual experience. It was unlike any of my prior ones. But we heard of other actions going on in different classes where the disagreement at the classes level, bubbles to the surface, and it can be a little bit of politicking even at the classes level. And so it's an open question, but I do think people who are in support of the decisions coming from Synod, they have something to take back to their classes and kind of say, wait a second, these are the things that we've decided. What about this? What about that? Just kind of elevating those questions again.
Okay. Now, Rick and I are both synodical deputies, so we get the chance to visit a lot of other classes. And, Synod is a very uniform thing. There are rules about it. It's paid for. I've noted in previous episodes that the number of, let's say, delegates or even alternate delegates is diminishing, but classes are, you walk into a classes meeting, there are times when you walk in as a synodical deputy and you have no idea what you're going to find. The level of church order compliance, the level of, and then you get the Korean classes. I mean, I'm sorry to name you out. Arizona, it's a very odd, small classes. Yellowstone's kind of the same. Both of these were classes that were sort of split off of larger classes because they were hoping they would grow, and maybe they didn't. And so the classical world is wild compared to the synodical world. It really is. David, what do you think happens after the Synod? You're in Classes Toronto, so.
Yeah. We're in for an interesting year. Well, and I'm new in Classes Toronto, and so I hate, in a way, speaking for it. But I've also been, now I'm the chair of the interim committee. So
lucky you.
Yeah, lucky. I know. And kind of the last man standing. It's a bit of a theme, I think, in Classes Toronto. We have about maybe a quarter of our churches that do not have pastors and can't find them because high cost of housing and people may be unwilling to move. And so you have a lot of vacant churches. So we have pulpit supply. And now we have probably a few churches in our classes that are on limited suspension, but we need them for pulpit supply. But can they do that? I don't know. So when we have votes at our classes meeting, they generally tend to tilt progressive. But we also are having trouble talking about it, and we made a decision at our last meeting to not talk about it. And I was, guys, this is the only thing we really need to talk about is our future together. We need to have heart-to-heart conversations about our future together. So what I like about what Synod did is it's going to force us to have heart-to-heart conversations about our future together. So I'm thinking from sort of the classes leadership perspective, how do we do this well and not just react? So do we have some sort of retreat? What do we do to get us in the same room to talk? And the other thing I think is important, this isn't if the denomination was split, if Synod was more like 60-40, you'd have a lot more people kind of wanting to just hang on and see what happens. I think the benefit of this being so decisive over the last 3 years is for the progressive churches, it's clear now where the denomination stands, and they have to make a choice about, can we continue to participate with this? Can we submit to this? I think for the progressive churches in my classes, I don't think they'll want to anymore to submit to this. But I don't know. We have to have those conversations. But Classes Toronto had 7,000 people in it in 2002, and now we have just over 2,000 people in it. 25% are vacant. A lot of churches under 100. We're just not in a great place to have a big fight and survive it. So I'm hoping that we can find gracious, gentle ways to have honest conversations with one another over the next 8 months, and then hopefully make some decisions. But it's I have a feeling it's just gonna be really hard. And I don't know what our classes will look like in a year from now. And even churches that are on the more traditional side are willing to submit. I don't know how they're going to find office bearers. I feel that, pretty strongly too. I just think they're going to have trouble. They're going to have trouble finding people.
Rod, is anything going to change because of the Synod in your classes?
Not a bit. There are no progressive churches in Classes Arizona. Even our relationship, mutual relationship with the RCA and the Orangewood Community Church, where it's a joint mission of the RCA and the CRC, very conservative people. It's not going to change any of our conversations. There may be a little, well, we did it kind of, rejoicing or whatever, because of some of the membership of our classes, but it's not going to change anything. I think it's going to be Classes Arizona keeps getting written off as dying. When I came to Tucson, there were 45 Christian Reformed people in Tucson, and now we have 3 churches that have probably 350 people or so amongst them all, none of whom have any sort of CRC connection. So in that sense, real connection from historic connection, like me. And I'm a sentimentalist. I'm a nostalgia guy. So I do a lot of weeping because I hate what we're losing. But I don't think, one of the things that I spoke twice on the floor of Synod, once to pray, which thank goodness I got to do, and once against this signing of the covenant, like really, and because it was being ballyhooed as this is the way we can rebuild trust. And I just laughed because that's the opposite of rebuilding trust, right? The trust but verify, like that was the Reagan thing with the Russians. Well, then if you have to verify, you're not trusting. That's just, you can forget the first word. It's just stupid. And so we don't trust each other. And I feel even like there was mistrust of me. And I felt like, when I signed on to a minority report, it doesn't represent what I believe, but it was the best of the options I had, right? And so I think those are the kinds of things that when we stop trusting each other, then it's kind of over. Like, what's the point? And so if we can actually rebuild trust through vulnerability and story and conversation, I think, David, you're right on. If we can start rebuilding trust in each other, they're not operating against me. They're not trying to hurt me. We're in this together and we love each other. Then there's hope. But outside of that, you're not gonna Yeah, so I have to sign the covenant again. It was kind of funny because it comes right on the heels of, my wife and I celebrating our 50th wedding anniversary. All right, let's go sign a new covenant just to make sure that you still love each other. Like, please. So anyway, yeah, it won't change anything at classes.
Now, part of what's difficult for people to understand is that when it comes down to votes at synod, there's a lot of math that gets involved, where you have a whole bunch of classes. They're all over the place. All those classes have 4 delegates, and so those things get translated into votes. But when and in some ways, it will represent sort of the mind of the church when you think about the organic church. But it's likely the case that in many churches in the Christian Reformed Church, you have probably, because a majority of the people in a Christian Reformed church are traditional on this subject, there are probably some, it could be a small number, could be a large number, but they're a minority in the church for whom they're much more open. Some of them perhaps even affirming. They'd really like to see the church go in this way. Again, because of the instrument using the covenant of office bearers to try to do this, some churches, I think similar to classes, a lot of ministers, they do not want to push this issue in their church because they're like, this is only going to cause me trouble. There's no upside to this conversation in my local church. So, but at the same time, this is in some ways going to have a dynamic and local level. So some churches are going to be in crisis over this. Many churches, especially if they sort of read the room and say, I'm of 5 or 10 people in this church of 100 or 200, lean affirming, but I already know I go to a conservative church, so I've long ago made my peace with the fact that I see differently. But then, okay, do I sign the form of subscription? Before I sort of had this pass with a gravamen, I think many such people sort of take a silent gravamen and say, I'm not gonna make a stink in my own local church. My feelings are so. What happens at the local level with respect to this in churches where, well, they're predominantly conservative, but you've got a few people in there? What do you think happens, Ren?
I think that issue occurs with many things. Go back to women in office. I think people submit and people say, yeah, I understand for membership, I'm a member here, and yeah, they silent gravamen, they swallow whatever issue it is they have, and they submit to the will of the church. I think that I don't know. I mean, my locally for us, yeah, we're going to hold strong to that. Leadership should be of the same mind, on the confessional standards, not the same mind on everything, lock, stock, and barrel, but on the confessions. I think that's a starting point for where we have things in common.
Okay, what do you think happens, Rick?
Well, here locally, not much is going to change. I guess, backing up a little bit, the feeling I had at Synod was that we were talking really about kind of we're all related issues or peripheral issues. The real question is, what is our position, and can these two positions, are we going to agree to disagree? Will that work even? And basically, we address that question by looking at these other, gravamen, at discipline, covenant of office bearers. And the answer to all of that is, well, we're going to have one position, and we're going to be united in our one position. At least that's what we're going to expect of office bearers. And in some ways, I thought it would be better to just talk about those two questions. There was actually an appendix in the actually in last year's agenda and this year's agenda, just basically highlighting those two questions. That's what we're talking about. What's our position? What kind of community are we going to be? Can these two things be held together simultaneously? One side says that same-sex practice is a sin that needs to be repented of, that might endanger your very soul. The other side says, well, no, it's creational variant that should be blessed by God, or as someone else says, a holy precious gift. So you have sin and a holy precious gift. It's pretty hard, in my opinion, to hold those two things together. And so what you saw on the floor of Synod, if you're lean affirming and you come to Synod, you're going to hear lots of mini sermonettes, basically, calling for you to repent. I mean, you're just going to hear that. And by the same token, the other side is going to say, well, why you don't have compassion? You're too judgmental. And it's just going to go on and on and on. And so, again, I do think what we decided does elevate the conversation. Do you really want to continue like this? So again, it's the classics that have more affirming churches where this is really going to come into play. And I think it begins with just having that basic conversation. Can we really agree to disagree about this? I think you're hard pressed to make that case, given what has happened in so many other churches, even in the RCA. It's just very, very difficult.
Okay. Well, now I would imagine in Canada, and my view of what's going on in the Canadian churches is that they're probably same-sex marriage has been legal longer in Canada. I think Canada it's in the Americas, but there's a lot of Europe in it. How do you think this is going to play at the local level, David?
It's going to be tough. I think there's a lot of divided churches right now, and I think they have been having a lot of trouble for quite a few years now. My previous church, I don't exactly know what's going on there. It's been a couple of years, but it's a divided church. How are they going to call a new pastor? It's like, how are they going to agree to it? Because you sort of need to make a choice about which way to go. I don't know how they're going to do that. Same with the 25% of churches in Classes Toronto. How are they going to call a new pastor when there's a lot of division on the ground? I think, I think this is really going to test the Canadian CRC. There's, you got Towards Canada CRC. I can't remember the title, but that's going to have a bit of traction, I think, over the next year. I think they're going to have less traction than they think they're going to have. I don't think it's actually going to go well, but I don't know. You never know.
All right.
And a lot will my church is kind of quietly content with how things are going. And I'm very thankful for that. Like, it could be a lot different right now. So my feeling on my take on this issue is similar to my churches at the moment, which is just, I'm just so thankful for. But yeah, I think you're going to see a lot of Canadian churches really be impacted by this because it's definitely more progressive and more tolerant. Not always the best sense of that word, tolerant, right? Let's just keep the family together and not talk about this. I think you'll see a lot of churches that end up doing that, but that only works until you have someone come in that is same-sex attracted and wants to get married. It just, at a certain point, you have to face it and together make a choice. And I think that's going to be a very hard choice in Canada. A lot of churches are struggling already. So it's one thing to split when you've got 300 people. It's another thing to split when you've got 110. So there's a lot to consider. I will say, when I was at Synod, I had kind of culture shock. It's been a long time since I've been in the States. And so there were times when I'm like, are these my people? Like, I'm a traditional person generally, but I felt like it was a different experience. So yeah, along the way, I also felt like, oh, I wonder if maybe we do need a CRC in Canada. But I think that if we did have a CRC in Canada, it would quickly divide over this issue. It wouldn't last long. I have to go, so I'd love to just keep talking, but my wife and I are actually going to a Blue Jays game, and we got to hit the road. So,
where are your priorities,
I know.
David? A Blue Jays game?
Yes.
All right. Well, thank you, David. Thank you for giving us your time. And
Sure, happy to talk more anytime.
All right.
Good
Rod,
to be with you guys as well.
Just here.
Take care, David.
Any comments at the local level? You've got these, I think you said it nicely. In Tucson, you used to have 45 CRC members, church members, and now you've got, over 300. Is it been just, is this something that's going to be an issue, or has for your churches this issue, the churches have already sort of figured out where they stand on this. They've figured out how they approach it. And I mean, what do you think?
So we have great division in the village, right? Like in our church, I have affirmers and I have people who think that, we should burn them at the stake. And we have, Biden supporters and Trump supporters, and we all sit down next to each other and we all love each other, and we have to fight to do that, right? Like it's like you have to take it out of the context of the competitiveness and the we have to win mentality and just minister to each other. And so, yeah, there are people who didn't want to join the CRC because of particular stances we took, women in office or what, for instance. And then there are people who like, oh, that would be the greatest thing ever. We should be a part of that tomorrow. And so it's frustrating because it's not that we're not dealing with the issue, right? The accusation is always, you're not dealing with the issue. Well, yeah, we are. I can tell you some amazing conversations we've had over the years with lovely people who think very differently than I do or than the leadership. The leadership is of one mind, right? And I think, but that goes back to the submission question, not necessarily because we totally agree with each other, but because we choose to be together and stay together. And man, Ren, your thing about compromising stuff, that's the battle all the time, right? Like, what am I compromising? And so I really have to fight against that, and remember that. And I do, and I have taken stands where I go this far and no further, right? I just can't see us do that. So it won't affect that the church, but it's because of the mindset. I do want to add that that's the problem. We say, well, churches are affirming. Baloney. There are no such thing as institutions that affirm. I always used to say there's no such thing as a Christian bookstores. Bookstores don't get on their knees and give their lives to Jesus. Give me a break. There are bookstores that are owned and operated by Christians, and they will look different than those who aren't. So and the Phoenix Church was a great example. It just split in half because half of the people thought women in office was fine and the other half didn't, and so you just tore it in two, and that's sad. Like it's sad because this is where you took a stand and no further, right? And so yeah, it always boils down to individuals, to people, and I think we forget that sometimes. Well, the affirming churches in Grand Rapids East, or the affirming churches there, or the non-affirming churches here, or the Midwest where everybody got together and plotted this thing. Well, please, I can go. If your church is doing your job, you better have some people in it that vehemently disagree with even the standards of the church.
Mm-hmm. All right, I'm going to do one question, and then go ahead, Ren.
How is this decision in moving forward and this split going to affect you three pastors? I mean, Rod, with your number of trips, like you said, 89 when you're spending 2 weeks with people building relationships, and because I didn't do seminary, I can see from an outside perspective how Synod is old home week for a lot of people. And it really could be a vacation without the wife. And there's a reason why they have Canadian Bible study and what that means. And I mean, but this is causing this division, and you're going to have, you will probably lose friends over this. There will relationships that are going to get burned. And how deeply is that cutting you three?
The man who invited me to preach the very first time and walked me into becoming a pastor and sent me to Tucson is an affirming pastor. And so now I have to consider him as a unbeliever and a tax collector.
And we welcome him at dinner.
Which is how Jesus dealt with it. And I love that man to death, and I still love him, and I can't stop.
Nope.
I just can't stop loving these people that I know. And I can't say, okay, you're in or you're out. I know we officially said that. And, you know, I struggle with that part of it, just because, yeah. It's, you say I'll lose friends. I refuse to. I just won't do it. As much as it lies in me, we will remain in intimate, deep relationship and fellowship because, I think that's what Jesus invites us to. How did he treat tax collectors? Well, it's pretty clear, and by the way, he got a reputation for being a drunkard and a glutton. And so I better have that reputation if in fact what we've decided is, and that's what making it confessional did to us, right? Now we have to say you're out. You're out in the void, and that's hard.
Well, I disagree that's what saying it's confessional meant, because my understandings of confessional are not, let's say, salvific, and I really use that term in a measured way. I think part of the reason I wanted to see the Christian, and I knew the Christian Reformed Church was going to have a confessional conversation over this, was in the Protestant Reformation, you had this splintering of the church. And then, you've got the Roman Catholic Church burning people on the stake. A little bit later, you've got, Lutherans and Calvinists lining up to burn Baptists and non-Trinitarians and all of this. Now, fortunately, the losers, we didn't line up the losers of Synod and shoot them next to the FAC. We don't do that. I see confessionality as being, as at least helping us sort of say, this is what we think. And it was very clear that the local option was not going to work. The RCA tried the classical option. And I think we're going to try a synodical option. And what I want to see happen is I'd like to see the exiles now, the confessional exiles, not I'd like to see them stay together, and I'd like to see them stay together right next to us. And I would much rather I'd like to see sort of two parallel CRCs where we're actually continuing to sort of work through this issue. You might have churches hopping one way or another. You might have clergy hopping one way or another. But I know, Clay Leibold says I'm full of it, but that's fine. But, and I look at, so before Rod and I were on the Home Missions Board, we met each other over CRC Voices. And CRC Voices, I mean, this is perhaps almost as bad as Gore v. Bush that year, because presidential campaigns were often, because, you had Christians that George W. Bush was just, the devil incarnate, and Al Gore was the devil incarnate. And I mean, we watched CRC Voices just, blow up over that. And now CRC Voices blows up over this. But, you have friends, you have elders and, churches. And I mean, it's going to be complicated. And unlike what happened with the Protestant Reformed Church and the URC, I am hoping that the CRC enlightened progressives can show up the conservatives in terms of, okay, we're going to split, but we're going to split in a different way than they did. We're not just going to throw rocks at the church and go away and say, you're Christian Reformed and I'm Protestant Reformed, so, you are condemned. Okay, you're progressives. Let's work this a different way. Now, if I were serving a progressive classis or a progressive church, when Aaron Vriesman asked, what happens to you after this? I say, I stay with my church and I stay with my classis because these are my people. That's what I'm going to do. But if my classis and my church went a different way, I'd probably stay with them too. And then if I were a progressive, I'd say, okay, let's figure out how to not, be Solomon and cut Calvin University in half. Or, can we please be a little creative? And all you progressives are supposed to be the people who are flexible and open. And especially in Grand Rapids, you've got all these people with immense institutional memory and knowledge. If anybody can figure out how to make the pension, not be a dividing line, we should be able to do this. Okay. So, okay. I would like to see confessionality as this I believe. Oh, you believe differently. Can we use confessionality to actually discuss our beliefs? Because the kind of issue that we are wrestling with, like women in office or same-sex marriage, these are the kinds of issues that get resolved over centuries in the church, not years. And so if we can actually think a little bit longer, maybe we can do something interesting and productive. And that's my plea. And that's been my plea for a confession. I remember I said confessional conversations. The progressives didn't like it because I said the word confessional. They've sort of been, looking the other way about those issues. Conversation sounded like a progressive word. I said, look, we need to talk about these issues far more than the application. We need to understand how these issues actually drill down much deeper theologically. And to do that, we're going to need probably decades. So can we have structures that afford this, even if, I think, as Rick said, well, it's really hard to have two very different perspectives on a pretty foundational issue. I'm a conservative church, but I don't really mind my polygamous pastor. I don't really mind my polyamorous pastor. Because he's sleeping with my aunt and my niece. Love is love. I think it ain't gonna work. But let's talk about these things, and let's not just shoot each other.
I think you said you can disagree with me. You're always doing that anyway, and you're wrong. But I do walk in very conservative circles. And you do hear that this is salvific. It is, their souls are in danger. You can read it in the conservative sides on CRC Voices. You can read it, I have these conversations all the time with people. You are in danger of hellfire. That's where you're at. And so I don't want to gloss over that because I think, yes, I agree with you. Let's find ways to work together. Man, nobody's more excited about that than I am. But I think there are huge ramifications, at least in the very. And I don't know how conservative the conservative denomination is now. And it is that whole thing. Oh, well, now we won't have to fight anymore. Well, bull. We fought over women in office. We fought over the red and blue Psalter hymnal. I mean, we have found ways to fight about every stinking thing we'll ever, because Satan loves that crap. I'll just give him something else to argue about for 10 years. And meanwhile, nobody will come to Jesus. It's just stupid. And so, but yeah, denominations don't matter anymore anyway, in some ways. I have people all over the map in my church.
Faith is personal.
And it's just personal relationship. Yep.
Faith is personal. How do we move past? Conservatives would say the line was put down in 2022. It's a confession. Same line, 2023. We tightened up the noose to because there was some escaping around the edges with the Gravamen process. can't believe we're done now. Or do you? I mean, Paul, if your vision of the ACRC, the affirming CRC, takes off, I think if the CRC denomination helps them find the off ramp and they move as a group, did that end this? Are we? Or what's the? Yeah, exactly. What? How will we ever be? What's the future? Is it just one more? Do we go back to women in office after this because we need we can resurrect a fight because we need a fight? We don't want to. Do we fight because we don't want to look at our own personal walk with Christ? We want to poke out the speck in other people's eyes?
Any I don't know, Rick, do you have thoughts on this? But I mean, I get to talk a lot, so.
Well, I think, you have pointed out before that groups tend to, split right, leak left. And we have seen what I think is unique in our experience in the CRC at the moment. Conservatives outnumber progressives. And the part, I guess, I listened actually to the Neelan service. I watched it. I watched, Church of the Servant, just to see how they were Eastern Avenue. And you talk about friends, someone who was really instrumental in classes Greater Los Angeles, who was very helpful here. He's at Eastern Avenue. And, it's kind of been surprising, again, from a distance to see changes. The respect will still be there, but I just see these as two very different approaches. And again, you look at other churches, this issue is going to continue to ripple through every church, every single church. And I look at, this is kind of how I look at, progressives who really feel called. See, that's the thing. This is my calling from God. This is where we feel that God is calling us to, in this direction. And we've seen in some of the communications that they've said, really, no matter what Synod decides this year, we are still going to continue on the path that we believe God has called us to. Well, and then I kind of think of it as, it's the Paul and Barnabas moment, right? Okay, I'm not going to disparage you. I hear you, and listening to you is good for me, but it's just two different directions. And so I do respect, and again, when I visit Grand Rapids and I'm trying to talk to people that I know in classes Grand Rapids East, and it does seem they've already been having these discussions, that we're feeling called in a different path. We're feeling called in a different direction. What does that mean? And I want to say, what? God bless you. But everybody else is not following you at this point. And insisting that everybody follow you, it's just not going to work. And I think that's the other part of the issue. When you hold these together, what has tended to happen is conservatives basically say, as long as I continue, I'm in a sense offering my implicit approval of what you're doing. And I can't do that. So then I split off. And my in-laws were in a PCUSA church plant that had to decide which direction they were going to go. And so I heard about things unfolding in the PCUSA, and because of their different polity, their churches were asked, depending on the presbytery, to buy themselves out of buy their property back from the presbytery. And it was just very, very difficult and messy. And that's happened so often. I don't want to see that, right? I love making it as gracious as possible. but I have a hard time seeing how the two paths can maybe side by side, but not together. I just don't see it.
Well, it'll be, we will see what comes. And another question that I had, and I know we got to land the plane pretty quick. I was going to open it up to the crazies in the hive mind. I don't know if you guys maybe didn't watch the chat, but that's just chatter. I don't mean to dismiss the hive mind, but another interesting wrinkle in this is, of course, technology, because I saw Dwayne Kelderman give his address to Neeland on YouTube. And I haven't gotten a chance to check out Eastern, but I know that I bet you, if you look at the analytics, maybe they had 30, 40 people usually on a Sunday morning. This Sunday morning, you had a few hundred. So, but even that, I remind people that, you see 10,000 views on a Synod live stream. Denomination is 250,000 people. And a bunch of those 10,000 are repeats. They check in later. That's all more clicks. So you've only got a few hundred, or at best a few thousand people who are actually watching this carefully. Almost everyone else is just local church members, just, caring about all the stuff that's happening in their local church. But technology sort of, Rod, you talked a little bit about, outside influences. I mean, do I have more influence than Abide or Hesed? Maybe not Abide, maybe all one body. And so the body is now via technology, it's different too. So how has technology changed us, and where does that go with this?
I don't know. I can't get the stupid 23-year-old pastor intern to respond to my texts. So so I can't solve the big problem. No, we live in an era where there are more ways to communicate, and less communication happens than maybe ever in the history, right? Like, we don't actually communicate. We take stands and we take positions and we have a drum beat. And some of us are more popular, Paul, and less popular, Rod. It's just that's true stuff, right? Like, you just
oh, come on, you got a banner column, Rod.
Not a column.
You should have a column.
Just an occasional story. That's made the huge difference, right? It's how we talk now. It's how we engage. And even this forum, where we can actually sort of do face-to-face, there's a whole lot of stuff I'm missing, right? Because when we're together in a room, there's smell, there's taste, there's body language, there's all this stuff that I'm a hypersensitive. So I come up, like, when I'm in our little small groups, I come alive because I see all the stuff. When I'm on Zoom, I'm lost, because I miss out, and all I'm hearing is talking heads, and that's not the same. And so touch, hugging, all, just conversations are very different when they're in person, and we've lost that. The church is losing that, and I fight all the time to say, no, you can't get the same experience watching The Village on YouTube as you can if you come and actually smell the food cooking in the other room, right? Like, it's not, it's different. And so I can bemoan that, or just acknowledge it's real and keep going on.
In watching Synod coverage, the difference between being there and there was a vote taken at one point. The affirming side had lost, the ayes had taken it, and then they respond, who's opposed? It was heartbreaking to hear them in the room at the moment. It was heartbreaking. I didn't, it wasn't but it was, you could feel their pain. You could feel the suffering. It was tangible. and you watch YouTube, and there's not. And so the same thing is what we're saying. To see these small screens, Rod, you're out there, and you're not even an inch tall on my screen,
Right.
And you're 15, or you're 24 inches away from where I'm sitting. So I mean, it's really small, but yet, I could see I could get a sense you struggled at a couple points today in this conversation with the suffering in your own life from these actions and what has taken place, as you probably got from me as well. But you have to look close in this media to see that pain, to see that person weeping for those around them, and for what's taken place. But it's real, and yeah, if you're not in the room, you can't get there.
You live in Tinseltown, Rick.
Well, I think, definitely it is easier to marshal a following, or to attract kind of like-minded people. You kind of find each other as you comment, or as you sign up for things, or you kind of identify who's thinking like you. And, so yeah, the means of learning about things and aligning into groups, it happens much easier, I think.
The division, you're right. It's all about pain and struggle and suffering. I always say that the biggest fight we ever had at the village was between the vaxxers and the anti-vaxxers. Like, nobody cares about gay marriage, but everybody cared about vaccinations, and literally people come into blows in the parking lot.
Not even COVID vaccination.
Right. No, this was just regular old vac. And when I brought it to the attention of the powers that be in the denomination, they said, that's a thing. And yeah, it sure is. Out here in the hinterlands, it was. So I think that it's easy to just, what's going to separate us? We can concentrate on all that. How do we fight to be together? How do we fight to stay in relationship? How do we do everything in our power to walk together? Yeah, that's my passion. It's what I live for. It's why I can't stink and retire from my job. And I don't have any money, but it is like, I love just, people I disagree with, and then finding common ground, and then building on relationships. And yeah, that's the denomination I love.
Well, I'm gonna thank all three of you and David as well for joining me today. And I'm gonna keep this going another half hour or so, because I am gonna open it up to people who want to come in and talk. If you've got something you want to leave, go ahead and leave. But I just want to thank each of you for taking the time and sticking your neck out, because I know in some circles to be seen with me doesn't necessarily raise your status. So
right, yeah.
Well, Paul, it's the big time, right?
Yeah. We feel like we've arrived. Yeah, finally.
Well, speaking of arriving, here's a face that at least one of you will know. This is John Van Donk, my partner in crime in creating Estuary, and former minister of the Christian Reformed Church and Troubler of Israel. So, John, I first have to say that I have Mark Parker says the unclean Gentiles in the hive mind. PVK can't be seen breaking bread with us now that the Jerusalem contingent is in town. So
perfect, dude.
So all right, John. What's
I heard you refer to us in the hive mind as the crazies. So let's get that straight first of all.
There he is. He did slightly change on the name here from our Dutch Muslim. So.
Well, first of all, thank you, Rod, for that memory. Also, you telling me about the vaccine conflict and how horrible that was in your church, and yet somehow it was survived. And that also reminds me then of of my own miserable divorce and how painful that was and how much suffering happened around it, and how somehow it is possible through the grace of God that people find each other. And I have quite a workable relationship with my ex-wife right now, and we can do family celebrations together, and we can be in the same room for all kinds of wonderful things. And then furthermore, and I've mentioned this on Voices before, 80 years ago, Schilder hit the road in Holland on the issue of whether or not local congregations were bound by synodical directives, and or whether they were vrijgemaakt, which is free from synodical control. And not too long ago, there was a ceremony in Holland where these two denominations were reconciled and found each other. And maybe we are talking about an 80-year span.
I'm going to be dead, just so you know.
Well, but if we're not here for the long view, then what are we doing here?
Right.
Thanks, Rod. Thanks, Rod. No, and that is my hope. And I know maybe it's a pipe dream. I don't, you look at Len Vandezee, Bill Harris. I mean, many of the guys on Voices that I just dearly love and respect. And I don't want to, and many churches that have, COS, Church of the Servant in Grand Rapids. I mean, how many Calvin profs go there? Good night. And I don't know how Calvin works through this. And this happens just as Calvin is having all of the, they just lost their president that they had just brought in. And I mean, this is a mess. The CRC pension isn't, for those of us who have it.
Yeah. What is that?
Yeah.
Beer money.
By the way, was good night an intentional pun or just a Calvin? So sorry.
So and for me, I mean, again, because I've always sort of been on the CRC left. For me, I think if any group of people should be able to split left well for the long term, that doesn't sacrifice institutions, it should be the minders of institutions in West Michigan that have minded those institutions for a very long time. And when I hear them talking like, I understand that in the moment there's sort of a big, you err, you're surprised, you're unhappy. But at some point I'd say, okay, now think about this and think about what you want. If you really believe that this is you certainly believe this is your theological conviction, okay, figure out how to make it work and prove the main line wrong and do it right. And if 50 years from now, conservative churches, because they couldn't handle this issue well, are sort of dying, and these affirming churches are thriving, well then that's the proof we all need. Words are cheap, and words of talk has gotten cheaper with the technology. So that's my take anyway. Well, I thought we'd have a rush of Paul is next Calvin president. That would be a disaster. I thought we'd have a few more coming in from the hive mind, but I guess they're the Christian Reformed Church people are a little intimidating and frightening. So because when you talk about confessionality and people are like, I can't believe you call me to repent. It's like, have you listened to the Orthodox, how they talk? Have you listened to conservative Catholics, how they talk? Have you listened to Muslims, how they talk? I mean, people are all offended that they might think I'm going to hell. Oh, that's what you're afraid of? Well, maybe stay in your own little group then, because you get together with lots of people are going to have lots of ideas of it. Just start a YouTube channel. Just see who everybody thinks you are in the comments section and what their impressions of you are. It's wild, but if that's your standard, stay home and turn off the lights. Go ahead, John.
Well, I heard you make the transition from what happens at Synod is different from what happens at the classes, and what happens at classes may be different from what happens at the local church. But I think it's I've said this on your channel before, maybe not even too long ago. it is hugely important that we also differentiate between people who have to sign the covenant of office bearers and those that do not. And people can, in fact, be very active in their local congregations and be able to engage in all forms of ministry without necessarily having to be ordained office bearers. And my situation here where I'm at is a good example of that, in that I think that if the church were to firm up the rules for office bearers, and it now appears that that's happening, that doesn't mean that people can't be members of those churches and can continue the conversation in some form or another, even amongst themselves. Estuary groups work very well for that purpose.
Yeah, and I think actually the next fight is going to be, okay, what's the deal with membership, but that, like all of these issues, that's not just an issue of, let's say, here's this line and we're going to meet it. That's a issue of who actually has authority over the members. Does Synod supervise members? Oh, in what world? And the Christian Reformed Church has always had a balance in terms of its polity. And if it upsets that balance, there's lots of other things that start to shake.
Well, isn't that, and heaven forbid I would tell you, Paul, about how church, but the local council is the body that's in charge, and they give the power to classis and to synod. So it's the local church where policy really plays out.
Yeah, and so that's where these kinds of issues and these kinds of fights sort of get weird, because we start fighting over this, and now suddenly this issue comes up, and it's like, hey, wait a minute, and you saw some of that at Synod. So we want to give a couple other guys, Risto, what he's sort of been following along in this. What say you about this stuff?
Well, Lance had posted your video, I think from last year, about the moderates. Which way were they moving? And so that was really interesting to listen to that video after just having watched CRC Synod. And I grew up in a church that was not synodical. It was the Nazarene Church. So it felt like way more apolitical. I wasn't even aware who the leadership was. So it's interesting watching the CRC Church work this out in this moment. And I have no clue how the broader evangelical church sorts out these kind of issues that the CRC Church is wrestling with. I don't know, like, who could you point to say they did a good job?
Yeah. Well, and I get flack. I got a lot of flack from progressives, because what they say, well, Paul, you should use your channel to, and then basically use my channel to prosecute this fight. Now, I do use my channel to tell you what I think. It's my channel. But my hope has been, and now the unintentional, I didn't think this would happen. I didn't think non-CRC people would have any interest in any of this. And they still don't. I mean, if I talk about Jordan Peterson, more people watch than if I talk about the CRC. But to me, it's been interesting watching how others are listening to this and watching and learning, because most people out there aren't going to any church at all, especially in the West Coast. And those people are a little curious. They're watching and they're like, well, it's really important, if you're going to sort of come into a group, it's really important to know how they fight, because there is going to be a fight, and you kind of want to know that. And so, I hope I'm doing a service in all of this, but we'll see. So Mark is, and part of what's so much fun for me too is that I am very high. Rod and I are a lot alike in a lot of ways, in that we're very high in openness. We love getting people together, and we love diversity. And so, Mark, the channel sort of has a reputation in the hive mind. Oh, these are a bunch of conservative reactionaries because of Jordan Peterson, yada, yada, which really isn't entirely true. And so Mark comes in from, and Mark's sort of been out there sort of upholding a certain flag. So you've watched us talk today, Mark. What do you think?
I unfortunately I missed a lot of it because I was busy with other things, but I saw enough, and I loved your solution, Paul. And I'm coming from the left, but I think what you offered, and I didn't get the feeling like the gentleman heard you With all due respect, gentlemen, Jerusalem contingent. I didn't feel like you heard him or listened to him, because I thought it's actually a very elegant, at least an elegant interim solution to your situation that doesn't just drive a cleaver through your denomination. I myself I am a so-called progressive, but I attend a very conservative local congregation. And I think frankly, my side needs to do more work on the theology to answer the challenges that the conservatives do present. We'll never satisfy conservatives, but I think the answers given heretofore are just in general unsatisfactory. So I think the left has that work to do, if we want to put it in a left-right kind of thing, or affirming, not affirming. What do you non-affirming types call yourselves? Abiding, is that the label you like?
Traditionalists.
Traditionalists. Well, Jesus had words for tradition. That's okay. But all I would say is we all have work to do. But I really listened to Paul. And maybe watch it again. Maybe we'll clip it, and because I thought that was just absolutely beautiful. At the very least, for the short term. That's what I have to offer.
All right. Thank you, Mark.
Thanks, Paul.
Now, Tyler has been a CRC campus minister and is now serving in South Africa. So Tyler's been watching this for a while, and actually, So what do you have to say, Tyler?
Can you be a little bit more dramatic about the entry, though? He seems to prefer that. Please.
More dramatic about the entry?
Yeah. You need a little bit more flair as you introduce Tyler. Can you do that, please?
No, I can't. I gave all my flair to you, John. You get all the flair. Go ahead, Tyler. Why'd you jump in? What say you?
Yeah, I think the thing that after Synod that I'd been thinking about with campus ministry folks, just some of the conversations going on, my mind sort of turned to this pivot right in the moment, and it could just be the anger that people experience, but this pivot towards this fight over intellectualism, and this sort of people sort of calling out that Synod was anti-intellectual, sort of where the denomination's going. And it got me thinking about the way, the conversation went around the fundamentalist modernist split, how people were thinking, and wondering about, if this is, and again, it could just be the in the moment chatter, and that immediate reaction. But my thoughts sort of turned to, how is this similar, dissimilar, and how do you proceed from there in a way that, how do the majority and the conservative confessionalists, how do you create further conversation? How do you build on that? So if you think back to that time, you think of people just before that fundamentalist modernist split, Bavinck, Kuyper, moving into it, creating new sort of avenues, structures, ways of thinking about the confessions even. So with Kuyper, this sort of idea of reaffirmation, but reformation of confessions. So how do you begin to think through these ideas of intellectualism, anti-intellectualism, and all of that? That's just where my thoughts have been lately, seeing some of the feedback from campus ministry folks, a lot of frustration, a lot of pain, and so that's just where I'm at the moment.
One of the things, again, one of the reasons I do CRC stuff on my channel, and not just the other things I use my channel for, is I find an amazing lack of public analysis in the denomination. And, you know, before I started my YouTube channel, I actually applied to be a banner editor. And I don't know that I would have been a good one. And I would have given Rod a column. I would have had Rod, you know, write well, it's not every week anymore. It's every month for the banner. But, you know, there's reflection happens at different levels. But again, I think Rod's right. When they went from a 2-week synod to a 1-week synod, you have no time in that meeting to do almost anything. It is so fast, especially when you have a heavy agenda like this, that, you know, I think in some ways Reformed Journal did some of that back in the day. But we are taking part in far larger arcs that are going through the culture. And the fundamentalist, modernist fight in the beginning of the 20th century that sort of split up the churches. We're still participating in some of those things. And, you know, part of the reason I like getting into the Peterson, Peugeot, Vervaeke stuff is you're going down into a much deeper level about, okay, confessions. How exactly do they work? Because right now we've seen in this conversation, you've seen confessions, and then you've seen community. And so we've got CRC has been strong culturally, strong confessionally, and well, the book dropped. I can still reach it. You know, somebody like, how many of these books? And now, you know, this guy can self-publish a book on Amazon. He can send it to me. And I can hear all the little idiosyncratic things, which I enjoy, about Rochester CRC 30 years ago. We have to do a lot better at a whole lot more stuff than just taking a vote and saying, you're in, you're out. Sometimes you can't avoid taking a vote, but there's way more we have to do. Go ahead, John. Go ahead. Plug Estuary. Go ahead, John.
No. I wasn't going to do that.
Oh.
I am somewhat sensitive because I read Voices religiously to the criticism that more progressive people have levied against the conservatives as being breakers of trust. We're gonna apply political pressure. We're gonna get this done this year. We're not gonna have any leftover business. We're not gonna do this slow. We're just gonna do it. And then I'm reminded, and I don't know where that was brought to my attention, but I mean, I sense it myself too, that the long endurance of the traditionalists to live with and abide by and hang in there with progressive pressure over multiple decades, pressure. And at some point, you can sort of see the handwriting on the wall. Well, let's give him some more time to put pressure on. No, let's not. Let's not do that. Let's just be done with it. And so I can sort of understand that there was a little bit of, you know, gathering the troops, circling the wagons, and say, let's level the playing field, and let's let our presence be felt. And so now the progressives are hurting and struggling, and in some cases even whining that, well, I mean, we know who we're listening to and who we're hearing. So I'm not saying any of this august company. I didn't mean that. So
Rod's always whining about, like, tamales aren't good. Commission pastors get no pension. Wine.
There you go.
Hey, Rod, here is the question you want to ask Paul. When he makes you a regular contributor to the banner, what will be the pay per word?
Wow.
I don't think I will ever be the banner editor.
Yeah, I don't think it's a problem. I don't think Paul's ever going to be anywhere near banner editor. I think he should have been, and I should have had not just a column, but been like, we should have gone back to a weekly banner where I had a weekly column, and it should have paid really, really well. which would have allowed me to retire instead of being 71 years old and still working. So, yeah, that's, you know how it is. I talked about it in some of my Synod poetry about, we're out here as church planters suffering for Jesus. Nobody cares. So just so you know.
Wine.
Yeah. Okay. I'm
Thank you, Rod.
I'm
Thank
a
you.
blessed man. If you only knew how blessed.
All right. Anything else anybody wants to put forward? Otherwise, we can land the plane, and I'll give you some more dog bark and Freddy.
Well,
go ahead, Risto.
Yeah. I mean, I think the conversation isn't over for the CRC because you can kick churches out and people out. But what about your children, the people who come visit, the society as a whole? The evangelical world, I don't know if they have a great response to the revolution that took place in the 60s and 70s. So you need good answers for those people. And then there's also the people that are homeless like me who are looking for churches, and just saying we're not affirming isn't much to offer. So the CRC needs to figure out, like, what do you have to offer for people that are coming? And seeker sensitive megachurch might not be the path forward.
We never did that very well anyway.
Yeah, that was not an issue.
No, and I think that's right. I tease Rod and John, but I love and respect them both greatly. And, Rod, part of why Rod is the leader that he is in the Christian Reformed Church, however uncompensated, is because his
dig.
Oh, we just don't quit. You've been Donk and I together. John Vervaeke leans over to me. You must really know John Van Donk for a long time. I said, no, not that long. We're just CRC together, so we know how to tease. But
there is that ferry trip.
Rod has been in the trenches with these things for a very long time. I mean, Rod went someplace, and he'll tell you the story. He told it on the channel before. Utterly failed as a seeker-sensitive, big-box church planter. And because the home mission supervisor thought, boy, doing the paperwork to give all that money, Rod, just do something Christian-y. And he meets a Baptist, and together they form this church that doesn't have pews, doesn't have movable chairs. If you want to see a cool church, go see the Village, smell the cooking, and you walk into that place, and it's like this big room full of used sofas and chairs. And so when he says smell the Village, yeah, there's some smells in that room. But, what he did was he not only planted a church out of the diverse misfits of Tucson, Arizona that can't agree over a measles vaccination, not a COVID vaccination. But not only did that, but also in time, even though he, I'm not getting it done, it's not happening now, decades later, has multiple churches that are actually doing the basic work of the church. Yes, they're conservative, but they are churches, and they are in many ways struggling, but even flourishing in their struggle. And, you can look at Dave Snapper's big trend lines in the denomination. Oh, the denomination is dying. Yeah, maybe it is, but there's a little flourishing going on in Tucson. And I hear others, there's a little flourishing going on in Sherman Street. And on the ground, it's always way more complex than it is, I hear, on internet land. So, so for me, Rod is a hero, and these questions are all going to be dealt with at the local level. And what happens is that when, things then bubble up and we learn from each other. And if there's one thing that I want us to do, it's to be able to continue to learn from each other, whatever side of the line we are on. And I think if we do that, I think that's what we're called to do. Go ahead, John.
I have a question for Tyler, because I'm very curious how all these things play out in South Africa right now.
Yeah. It's very interesting. I think I mentioned in passing just maybe a few weeks ago how some of these same things are being litigated in terms of, you know, the Reformed Church here, and not just within the Reformed Church, but between European and American churches that came to Africa, and then the reaction. You have so many dynamics at play, right? So there is the colonial response, the, you know, anti-colonial response, but you also have sort of a neo-colonialism in people from the U.S. and Europe returning and saying, "Here, we will help you fix the problems that colonialism caused, and we'll tell you what to do to fix them." And you have, churches here trying to figure out, how do we walk the tightrope of that? Sexuality is one of those issues. Issues around race and ethnicity and cultures. In fact, this is one of the reasons why I love the opportunity I have to think sort of creatively about how do we use our confession in the context of our congregation, which is predominantly Africans from across the continent, not South Africans, although we do have a number of local families, individuals, and to think through, how do we talk about these things, and how do I sort of help guide people in our church to see the value of these for forming that scaffolding I think David mentioned earlier, for our faith, and especially in the midst of conditions where not only do you have these sort of theological, cultural, historical issues at play, but also you have real dangers of people who are out there to fleece the sheep. They want to take advantage of people. They want to take their money. They want to have power over them. And it becomes a very real situation of physical harm, of financial catastrophe. So confessions and creeds and how you contextualize them and how they testify to the teaching of Scripture is huge. And it's been going over well so far in our conversations, but that's maybe just a quick overview of that.
Thank you.
All right. Anybody else? Anything they want to just kick out there before we hear more Freddy and dog bark?
Time to go eat.
All right.
Who is that Dawn you showed up on the thing?
Dawn. She just called us a bunch of whiners. So if you want to meet Dawn, go to CRC Voices. Can't miss her. She's actually the founder of CRC Voices. Was a professor at Calvin of computer science, and Dawn is a fixture there. So, all right, and she actually knows how to use a computer, so that's why she can. Many people, they'd struggle to get in the comment section. What are all those words going over there? And they're silly, and they're silly. Well, thank you all for joining us here, and thank you for contributing, and I really appreciate it. Again, Ren, Rick, and Rod, thanks for this, and thank you for the rest of you who, she is a bit more fun in person. That's true. So, all right, thank you all. I am going to bring in. Well, let's see if I can find the Low Blood Sugar Blues, which Dog Bark came to. He's a grandpa, and his son said, "Why don't you write a?" I'm gonna have GPT write a song, the Low Blood Sugar Blues, and he wrote it up. So thanks for watching.
Thanks for hosting, Paul.
Take care.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you.
Nice to meet everybody.
belly is rumbling and you're feeling low. It's the low blood sugar blues. We all should know. Woke up and feeling cranky. Tears begin to flow. Nothing seems to cheer me. Nowhere good to go. Everything's upsetting. Tears in my eyes. Low blood sugar blues. Can't you hear my cry? Grab a little snack. Maybe fruit or cheese. It'll bring you back. Put your mind at ease. Low blood sugar blues. They're not here to stay. Eat a little something. They'll be on their way. Feeling kind of sleepy. Weepy. In my heart. Hunger makes me grumpy. Tears just start. Mom says, have some raisins or a little treat. Yes, Sue, I'll stop the crying and feel my best. So sweet, yeah. Grab a little snack, maybe fruit or cheese. It'll bring you back. Put your mind at ease. Low blood sugar blues, they're not here to stay. Eat a little something, they'll be on their way. Remember, little buddy, keep your energy high. Snacks are there to help you dry those tears. Don't cry. Grab a little snack. Yeah, maybe just fruit or cheese. It'll bring you back. Put your mind at ease. Low blood sugar blues, they're not here to stay. Eat a little something, they'll be on their way. Wow, you're feeling better. Ready for some fun. Low blood sugar blues, they're on the run. tummy's rumbling, you're feeling low. It's the low blood sugar blues we are sitting on.